hate speech is, if it is targeted against one person, it cannot be only a private issue. It is a public issue. It is a common issue. And the whole society has to be informed about the possible outcomes, and especially when it escalates, which we do see now.
Underreporting is a big problem in this field, and we don't know how many victims are of hate crimes.
It's a response that takes the needs of the victims into consideration, where the response of the authorities and civil society organizations involved in supporting victims are centered around the actual needs of the victims. The victims are asked about their needs, so they are the ones identifying what type of support they actually need throughout the procedure, and that is taken into consideration throughout the criminal process.
Often, hate crime victims are targeted because of several grounds, several identities or several personal circumstances, and that cumulates and multiplies, and it has a totally different effect on a life of a victim. And the research shows that on one side, professionals working in NGOs all say that intersectionality is a big risk factor, and they can name numerous cases that they have seen. On the other side, professionals working for state institutions very often say that the cases that they deal with are simple and based on one personal ground. So there's a huge gap.
Victims decide to keep this private because they are afraid that the police will not do anything, or they might even fear that the police will treat them in a similar way, in a discriminatory way. They might be afraid that their sexual orientation or their religion becomes public, and they want to avoid this. So all these reasons mean that they don't report the crime to the police. And of course, if it's not reported, the police is not aware of it, so they cannot start an investigation, they cannot catch the perpetrator, and there will be no sanction at the end. But more broadly speaking, on the social level, it makes hate crimes less visible and less important to decision makers or to chiefs of police, so they don't invest necessary resources in developing the systems available. So it is very important to show that this is an issue, and the easiest way to show that is to make sure that all the cases that happen, or as much as possible, are actually reported to the police. It's crucial to have good legislation in place. That's the first step. But it's not enough, because legislation is, of course, always very brief and just says what is a crime and what kind of elements make up that crime. But we need more detailed guidelines about how to investigate and how to respond to a hate crime. So these investigative and prosecution protocols are very practical documents that say, let's say, what should a police officer do when they are called to a scene of a hate crime? What kind of data or information do they have to collect? How should they behave towards the victim or towards the perpetrator? Then in the investigation phase, what kind of bias indicators should be uncovered? How to collect data about the potential bias of the perpetrator. So such a protocol can describe, like, step by step what are the needed measures to implement, and then these can be used as a standard. So if police officers do not do what's required in the police protocol, then they are failing their job, they are negligent, and then they can be called out for it. So it's an important way to help police officers understand their duties and their responsibilities, and also to set standards based on which we can assess whether a proper investigation and prosecution has been done.
I would say bias motivation, the different grounds, the most frequent grounds that can become a ground for the hate crime, so sexual orientation, gender identity, race, religion, and so on. the under-recording phenomenon and also the under-reporting phenomenon. So how to, I wouldn't say convince victim to report, because we don't want, we have not to push victims, but only encourage the victims. So I would say encouraging, how to empower victims to report and to, yes, and to find the courage to report, but autonomously, I mean, without forcing it. So bias motivation, under-reporting, under-recording, and empowering victims.
The role of hate crime police officers is that they are the ones who are taking the report. So if a crime victim can make sure that the person that takes the report is understanding and is empathetic and is not using discriminatory statements, so that they can trust the police and they can turn to this person that they can trust, it makes the reporting much better. It can tackle underreporting. When it comes not to the reporting but to the investigation, these are the police officers who know how to identify and record and explore the bias indicators. They know how to make a convincing argument that a crime and a hate crime has been committed. So they're just much better prepared to deal with the specificities of such a crime.
I'm going to talk about the special prosecutors in hate crimes and discrimination, because since 2013, each Spanish province has a special prosecutor specialized in dealing with hate crimes and discrimination, in the investigation and prosecution of hate crimes and discrimination, under the general coordination of the general prosecutor established in the central in Madrid.
Good and mostly important sustainable cooperation between NGO and public actors is crucial for the effective response to hate speech and hate crime, because both of these stakeholders have essential knowledge and resources that may benefit and complement each other.
I believe NGOs are crucial because there is lack of support on the side of the state, and I also believe it's a different kind of support NGOs can offer. They can also offer support from the community, as mentioned before. They can maybe often offer also support from different angles at the same organization. For example, Legibitra works in a lot of different fields, so we can offer psychological support, legal support, and so on.
There are different types of awareness raising. It depends on the target audience. So who do you want to reach with your awareness raising activities? So there are online and offline activities. There are campaigns, there are training for professionals, for law enforcement officials, for the police, prosecution service.
So of course, in awareness raising, there are different angles you can tackle the issue. However, we for example have a website it's called NIPRAU, which means not right. And through this website we offer different steps how to report the hate crime or hate speech, how to deal with next steps, and how to get support. So I think this is one way of awareness raising in a sense of a campaign. This was part of a campaign. We put like billboards on buses and so on. And we promoted this website. So I think this was one really actually useful thing for us to raise awareness.
I think that it is important to document, because otherwise you don't have an actual view of what is going on, of what the actual extent of the problem is. So each country should develop a monitoring mechanism so as to be able to have an overview. I think that no organization and no authority can provide holistic support. on their own. So the needs of the survivors of hate crimes are different based on the nature of offense and their individual circumstances. So what is more effective in practice is to create networks where all the involved actors can directly contact each other and refer the survivor to the appropriate services following their needs.
For me, and referring to talking about the law enforcement authorities and judicial authorities, is key to not just to focus on the punishment of the offender, but also focus on the restoration of the harm caused. And that's mean to listen the needs of victims, that victims have a space to talk about their feelings, to talk about their pain, to talk about their needs to restoration.
SOS Racismo a Catalunya adopt a restorative approach with victims, so we try to put emphasis in the process beyond the result, and also we try to meet the needs, desires and expectations of each victim, but also taking into account the perpetrator and the role of the community for the transformation of the conflict.
A practice is a good practice that is not dependent on the national context, that is transferable, that is sustainable, that is victim-centered and takes intersectionality also into consideration.
Well, this is a project implemented in 6 European countries, and we aim to combat violence, hate crimes against several minority groups. There are many differences among the countries, different legislation, but we have also different legal obviously legal contexts and social contexts, and professional skills, tools, and everything. But I think that the more it's important issue about that is like, with this project we try to create a new perception, to introduce new discussions in the supporting victims of hate crimes.